Hey, welcome for joining us about refrigerator pickles. And what I really love about refrigerator pickles is they are easy, they're quick, and the sky is the limit for what kind of produce you can use. We've done this with kids at camp. They love the opportunity to pick things they like to eat and then pickle them. So some samples that I'll talk about a little bit later. I did some quick cucumber slices, did some green beans, some carrots, pickled onions, which I'll show you after, and some radishes, which I absolutely think are so pretty. So we'll talk about those, and you can finish up the pre-poll. So this is a method compared to other food preservation methods that's really fast, and it allows us to sometimes make and eat the pickles within an hour, which is really fun. Normally, something you pickle would take several weeks to ferment or to absorb the brine so that it has really nice flavor, but this is fast and easy. Because this method is stored in the refrigerator, you can really play with it. Anyone who's taken our home canning classes in the past knows that what we say is that you must follow the recipe. You may not deviate. You can't make any changes whatsoever because it's scientifically tested for a specific food in specific amounts. With refrigerator pickles, you can vary everything. It's like cooking on the stovetop. And because you store it in the refrigerator, you don't have to worry about it spoiling. And these we recommend using within 2 weeks. Not that they're going to last that long because they are so delicious. And because they're fast, you can keep making them throughout the seasons with whatever's available. This is not a recipe that is safe for home canning. I will share with you the recipe later for the beans, and we'll talk about that. That is a home canning recipe that I just skipped the canning step for and put in the refrigerator. But all the other types of things we're talking about today are not suitable for home canning. If you wanted to can them, and by canning, I mean putting them in a jar with a 2-piece lid and processing it in a boiling water bath, then you need to follow a recipe that is specific for the canning process. But for something you're going to keep in the refrigerator, you can do anything you like. One health note. Pickles are really nice, fresh. You get the benefits of all the vegetables. But because we use salt in the pickling process, they are higher in sodium. And so from a health standpoint, a lot of us need to limit our sodium. So you can do 2 things. One is you can cut back on some recipes for the brine and use less salt. And most of these recipes don't use a tremendous amount of salt compared to some other kinds of canning recipes. But also watch your portion size and the frequency with which you eat it. So if you only eat it once in a while and you eat a small portion, like it's a condiment on the rest of your meal or on a different dish, then you're not getting quite as much sodium, but do keep that in mind. So the first thing you need to think about is what kind of containers you're going to use. So I like to use home canning jars. You can typically use either a half-pint jar, which is 8 ounces, or pint jars. You know, that's good for lasting those 2 weeks and using what you want. Sometimes for things you might use a 4-ounce jar, or maybe you have a quart jar. If you're using the jars, once the poll is answered, you can shut that down. There are 2-piece lids. You can use these for canning, or you could use them for home food storage. You could buy these separately in the supermarket, or you can buy them as a set. These lids are only used once if you were going to can with them, but you can reuse them for the refrigerator. What they also sell are these plastic storage jar tops. So they're plastic. They come in what we call a standard mouth size, or this is wide mouth. So make sure you know which size jars you have. And they are suitable for storing food in the refrigerator, a freezer, or in your cabinet. If it's a dry, let's say I have dried beans in this jar, I could use this in the cabinet. It is not, the plastic is not used in home canning in a boiling water bath, but perfect for these refrigerator pickles. The other thing, of course, you could You don't need to use glass jars. They just look really pretty, but you can use whatever plastic food safe containers you might have it at home. This one has a nice sealing lid. This one's more like a jar for making freezer jams, but whatever you have that is food safe, that's not going to leak when it's tipped, are perfectly fine. And I will mention one thing. These lids are great for the refrigerator, but make sure they're held upright because they are not leak proof. So if you're transporting them, just know that it's possible for these to leak. This lid does not leak as much because you can seal it down tighter, but these will drip if you're not careful. So those are your containers. The next fun part is deciding about the brine. And the flavor here is all about the brine. So the brine has four basic ingredients. One is water, one is vinegar, one is salt, a little bit of sugar usually, and then whatever seasonings that you want to use. So let's talk first about the vinegar. So you have several choices. You want to use a 5% vinegar, and if you look at the food label, almost all vinegars are labeled 5%. The only exceptions might be if you were using some specialty herbal vinegar, but otherwise they're all 5%, and that's standard across the industry. So this is white vinegar, has a nice sharp vinegary flavor. It doesn't have any other flavors in it that are going to mask the flavor of that vegetable. And because it's clear, when you're pickling, the brine stays clear as well. If you like a little bit softer flavor, not so sharp, apple cider vinegar is a really good choice. As you know, it's a little bit tan or brownish in color. So again, if you're having a white like cauliflower, it'll take on a little bit of a tannish color over time because of the apple cider, but it's a nice soft, not as sharp flavor. Experiment. There's nothing to say you couldn't use a wine vinegar or a flavored herbal vinegar. This, again, red wine vinegar has a little different taste. It's going to also color the food if it's a white or very light colored vegetable because it is red in color. Balsamic vinegar, because it has such a strong flavor profile, probably is not a vinegar to use in this recipe. But again, if you want to experiment, maybe just having the dash of the balsamic vinegar in your brine to boost up the flavor, that's perfectly acceptable here. You can mix and match whatever works for you. The next thing you're going to use is some salt. And generally, what you want to use is kosher salt. So kosher or a salt labeled for canning. And the reason for that is that some of our table salts have either iodine added to them or an anti-caking ingredient. And both of those cloud the brine. So it's not as clear and it gets a little bit cloudy. And so it doesn't look quite as pretty. If you want to do this and the only thing you have in your house is iodized salt, go ahead and use it. It's only going to, it's a little bit cloudy. It won't hurt you. Sometimes we just want to use what's on hand. But if you have a choice, canning and kosher salt are the preferred salts. The sugar would be table sugar, granulated sugar is usually what we use. And then we have the herbs and spices. And again, here you can be as creative as you want. You can use fresh spices. You can use dried. You can use powdered. You can use whole, whichever ones work for you. The whole spices add a little visual interest. If you have a whole head of dill, it's pretty in the jar because you're going to put those right in the jar. It looks really nice. A few peppercorns in there also look very nice, but maybe you want to use curry. So you're not going to see that. Again, you can add those as well. A word about garlic. We're going to add garlic to the dilly beans. Garlic sometimes turns purple when it's in a brine, and that's a naturally it's a natural process. It's just a chemical interaction with the vinegar and the compounds in the garlic. So there's nothing wrong with the garlic. You can eat it. So if you happen to see your garlic after 2 weeks looks purple and you go, oh my goodness, perfectly okay. Most of your recipes, and maybe Siggy could close the poll and open up the brine recipe. I mean, I'm going to include, we're going to put in the chat some links to all the recipes that we have today, or the fact sheets in a couple of cases. And then at the, probably in the next day or so, we will send you a link to this, to all the recipes in an email as well. So the basic recipe is either sweet or sour. And what you're going to do is, it's almost always equal water and vinegar. So one of the handouts that we'll make available is from the University of North Carolina. Can you pull that up? Oh, yes. Yeah, you could close the poll and then pull the other. So this, it's either a sour or a sweet brine. The sour brine is 3 cups of vinegar plus 3 cups of water, 3 tablespoons of canning salt, and then 2 tablespoons of sugar. Gives you a little balance to the, gives you a little bit of balance to the sweetness of the recipe. And then you're going to decide on what herbs you want. So first you'll mix up this basic brine of the vinegar, the water, the salt, and the sugar. And you're going to heat that to boiling for about 2 minutes. And what that does is it dissolves the salt and the sugar and gets the brine nice and hot. For a sweeter brine, the recipe indicates you can go up to 1.5 cups of sugar. You go, wow, that's a lot. Yes, but say a sweet and sour pickles have a fair amount of sugar. But the beauty of this brine recipe is that you can vary that sugar. So you say, all right, I'm going to start with 2 tablespoons for a sour mix, but I want it sweeter, but oh, a cup and a half seems like too much. So the first time you make it with 3/4 of a cup. Keep notes if you're not paying. What I want to emphasize is if you're playing with the brine recipe, keep notes of what you do so that when you taste it, you go, wow, this is perfect. You can remember what you did, because if it's a variation and you make different varieties, then you may not remember later. And you set one spice profile that you have, and some family members like it and others do not. Again, make a note of how much you use, what you use, and then you can kind of find that perfect brine mix you want for that particular vegetable. Then in terms of the spices, a lot of, you can add red pepper flakes if you want to heat it up that. Some recipes add a little bit of cayenne pepper. What I would suggest is if you're using a powdery spice like the red pepper or say a curry, you could add that to the brine when it starts, when you're finished heating it, to help it dissolve a little bit, and it just makes that flavor infuse in the brine. For many of the solid whole spices, you're going to put them directly into each jar. That could also be a benefit if some of your family likes it spicy, like I like the hot pepper flakes, and somebody else in my household doesn't, so you can make the hot version and the cold version without having to make 2 different batches. Now the fun part. Let's pick the vegetables you want to do. Everything, you know, I've showed you some things here: carrots, peppers, whether they're the sweet bell peppers or any variety of the hot peppers. Broccoli works well, cauliflower, asparagus is fun, jicama, the onions, green beans, anything you might purchase at a farm market or grow in your garden that has that nice crunchy texture to it is a good food to pickle. You can mix vegetables in the jar. I've done mixed cauliflower and broccoli. So whatever flavor combinations you like, provided you like the spice mix that you add to the brine, are perfect to mix it up. Just remember, if you're doing something like beets and you're using the red beets, if you put the cauliflower in with the beets, that cauliflower is going to turn pink because the red in any vegetable will leach out into that brine solution. And pink cauliflower might be fun, and it certainly looks pretty on a plate as well. Most of your vegetables you're going to slice or cut into some sort of sticks, probably about 1/4 to 3/4 inch thick. You don't want them too thick because then they won't be absorbing the brine as well. In the case of, something like the green beans, I didn't cut those, or I used some baby carrots here, and, I didn't cut those either. But generally, you don't want really thick food because it won't absorb the brine as well. You can also pickle fruits, pickled pears or apples or whatever fruit you want to try. I'm just going to give you examples for vegetables today, and you might want to use a sweeter brine for the fruit, but again, the sky's the limit for what you want to pickle. So let's slide this aside and let's talk about our pickled products. So the first thing I want to talk about is the red onions, and I'll show you a little bit about that. So I did red onions, and what I really like about it is, first of all, it makes a really pretty product at the end, and I can take out some so you can see it. Nice pink, bright color. Red onion has a lot of flavor, stands up well to the brine, but you could use white onions or yellow onions. In my house, we were talking about, could you do scallions? I don't see why not, so that might be fun too. So experiment, good thing to do. You want to slice your onions nice and thin. I did this ahead so I don't fry. But for slicing your vegetables, 2 things that work really good. Well, 3 things. Good knife skills, you can just slice as you go. For something like onions, I like to either use a mandolin if you have one. It has a blade. It's adjustable for how thick you want to use it. The food has to fit in this space, and then you use this pusher and slide the food back and forth. Because the pusher is not too high, you'd have to cut the onion to fit. This onion probably would fit right in there. The other tool that you may have at home is a food processor, and that's what I did these onions on. And, if they're done like that, no tears involved. So I find a food processor for many slicing jobs works good, but good knife skills work as well. So for these onions, you just need your onions sliced small, and then you're going to pack them into your jar. And you can pack them in fairly tight because they're going to soften up a bit and fill the jar. Now you want to leave about 1/2 inch to 1 inch at the top so that there's room between the top of the food and the jar so it doesn't overflow. I think I can squeeze the rest of these in. The whole room smells like onions now. And now we're going to add the brine. So I already heated up my brine. This was 1-to-1, 1 cup vinegar, 1 cup of water, and then 1 tablespoon of salt and 2 teaspoons of sugar. It's helpful if you have a funnel with a wide mouth to fill the jars. It keeps you from spilling all over, but if you don't have one, use your ladle and be careful. So you're just going to fill to the top. And then I'm just going to use a fork or whatever I have to stir this a little bit so that there's no air pockets. Press the onions down. And that's it. Let's see if I have my. So then I'm done. If you were less than clean around the top. You just wipe the top a little bit, put your lid on, and screw it down. You can leave this sit for up to an hour. I usually leave it sit out at room temperature for about 30 minutes. Set a timer so you don't forget. And after that, it goes in the refrigerator. If I wanted to use these tonight, and I was able to do that at home last week, I would just leave them sit for about an hour, and they were pickled enough that they tasted really delicious on our fish tacos. So how would I use these? I'll just open this so you can see the really pretty. I don't know if you could hear the pop, but because the jars are filled hot, they actually do seal, but it would not be the same. It would still not be safe for shelf storage because it was not processed, but it did seal, so I had to pop it over. So I think you could see how pretty these are. Absolutely beautiful color. These were delicious on my fish tacos. They would be good on any tacos. They are nice with barbecue. They'd be great on a grain salad. I put some extra into a grain salad that I made, topping a regular green salad. Just absolutely delicious addition to food. So within this bright color was made last night. So it's had 24 hours to less than 24 hours to marinate. It won't be quite as bright if I left these for an hour and then wanted to serve them, but the flavor would still be there. And the longer you leave things to marinate, the more deep the flavor, the more brined it's going to taste. So generally, you need at least an hour or two, maybe 4 to get some nice taste. If you can leave it for 1 to 3 days, the flavor will be even better. So those are our quick pickled onions. The next thing I wanted to show, the next thing I'll show you, and then we'll talk about a couple other things, is some cucumbers. So these were the quick pickled cukes. And you're going to want to choose cucumbers that are suitable for pickling if possible. Kirby is one variety. They absorb the brine better. They're not as seedy. They have more meat. Their skin's not quite too tough. Sometimes better than some of the field cucumbers. This is an English cucumber, and I chose that because right now cucumbers aren't available locally in my market. And in the supermarket, the general cucumbers are waxed, and that's to keep them fresh longer because otherwise cucumbers shrivel up to nothing. But waxed cucumbers cannot be used in pickling because it won't absorb the brine. So you don't want to use anything that's waxed. This one's not, so we can use that. Yes. Can you reuse the brine? Yes, you could reuse the brine, but it's going to lose some flavor. And to be truthful, it's not an expensive thing to make, so I would make fresh. It's just you might be able to reuse it once. People always say, well, could I have this pickle that I buy that I love, could I use that brine? Sure, you could do that. But for the most part, vinegar is very inexpensive, water, salt, and then it's the only higher cost would be your spices. Good question. So when you buy cucumbers, you want to look for those that aren't shriveled. Again, we're not going to use waxed cucumbers. Generally, the bigger the cucumber, the bigger the seeds. Most of us don't like really big seeds in our pickles, so smaller cucumbers are sometimes better for pickling. What you do want to do is remove at the blossom end, which is the opposite of the stem end. So you're going to cut both off. The blossom end has some enzymes in it that cause softening of pickles. Now, you might not notice it in a refrigerator pickle because it's only going to be there 2 weeks, but it's real important for those pickles that we can. And for aesthetic reasons, we generally take off the stem end as well. And then you're going to slice your pickles about a 1/4 inch thick. Smelling very cucumbery. Anyone who is good with a knife can do this really quickly. Uniformity of sizes is important. It looks nicer and you get better absorption. We're going to stop there. Oops. So I'm going to put these in my pint jar, which holds 2 cups. Toss them all in there. If you have wide mouth jars, you can actually get your fingers down in there and make it layer really nicely. This is a normal regular mouth jar and you can't fit your hand in there. For children, if you want to involve them in the kitchen, depending on their age, they may be able to use a age-appropriate cutting tool, not the mandolin, that is not child or even young children friendly, to cut up the vegetables, pick which vegetables they want in their pickled product, and then put it in the jars, and then they can help mix the brine, and then you can add the brine to the jar. So again, you want to leave about 1 inch or so at the top of the jar so the food's not going to overflow. And same thing, I'm going to use the same brine, brine for this, but I'm going to add some spices. So let's see. We're going to add a clove of garlic, and I'm going to crush that to extract more flavor and leave it whole. And then I'm just going to wedge it down in there into the jar. And then I'm going to use some dill weed. I usually use dill seed, but we didn't have any, and I forgot to bring mine from home. So we're going with it. So I'm going to use about 1.5 teaspoons of the dill weed because it's pretty mild in flavor. If you grow or can buy fresh dill with the whole dill heads, which is the seeds where it flowers, you could put that whole dill head in here. Looks really pretty. Plus you'll get all the flavor. And now I'm going to take this funnel and I'm going to ladle in my brine mixture. You can see how easy this is. Now I'm just going to stir this around so there's no air pockets. Push down my garlic again. May need to add just a little bit more brine. Okay. Good. And we finish our quick pickles. So we put our lid on it and we'd be done. All right, let's talk a little bit about the green beans. For the dilly beans, I use the recipe from the University of Georgia that is suitable for home canning. Only I skipped the water bath process. So you would fill your jar with green beans, leave them whole, cut them so that they fit within the jar. Question?
You just share what's in the brine mixture. Someone just hopped on this really quickly.
Yes. Oh, what's in the brine mixture? I'm sorry for someone who joined late. Brine is usually equal amounts of vinegar and water. So 1-to-1 ratio, salt and sugar. And we're going to share in the chat the recipe one recipe. And again, if you say 1-to-1 is a little too sharp for me, cut back on the vinegar a little bit. Start with, maybe 1/4 cup less and see if you like it more. You need a fair amount if you want that vinegary taste in it, just like the salt. You could cut back a little bit because it's stored in the refrigerator. So because we're doing this in the refrigerator, we could play a little bit with this recipe. If I was going to home can it, you may not deviate one bit from the recipe that's printed in the fact sheet. So take your green beans, put them in the jar. If you need to cut them to fit in the jar because they're too long, by all means do that. And while I'm thinking of it, last year I grew multicolored beans. So there were seed mix, had yellow, green, and purple string beans in the garden. And they looked really pretty. So I wanted to make some pickles because green bean pickles are one of my absolute favorite things. And I put some purple ones in there. And you know what? They turn green. They don't stay red. And I should have remembered this, but the anthocyanins that cause that purple color do not hold, they interact with the vinegar and they turn right back to green. So don't expect your nice purple beans to remain purple in a brine. They look pretty in a salad as long as you don't heat them and don't put them in brine so they stay pretty when they're raw. You also add then, so the beans are packed in the jar. To each jar, you will add 1 clove of garlic, 1 head of dill, or about a teaspoon of dill seed, not the weed, the seed. The weed is the feathery part of the dill plant. The seeds are the seeds that come from the flower as it matures. And then if you like things a little bit hot, add about a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper or a 1/4 teaspoon of red pepper flakes to each jar. Again, if you want some that like it hot and some that don't, you know, the hot stuff in some jars and to others. This one recipe makes 4 jars. The brine solution that we share with you today is enough to pickle 4 pint jars. The brine for this was 2½ cups of vinegar, 2½ cups of water, and a 1/4 cup of canning salt, and no sugar whatsoever. So you could play with the recipe in the refrigerator, but you could can this recipe following the directions that are on the resource that we're going to give you. Comes out really nice. And the nice part about when you keep them in the refrigerator is they stay really crisp. Canning involves some cooking time because you're processing it in a boiling water bath. So all foods tend to get a little softer. And they are really, you know, they maintain a really nice, bright green color as well. The other 2 things that I did for fun was I did pickled radishes, and they were red radishes, and they come out really, really pretty pink. I used the same brine recipe that we used for the other ones. What I used for spices in this one is I had some fresh lemon thyme in my garden. So I put like a couple of sprigs of the whole thyme plant in there. And I think that was it. So they're delicious. And the other sample that I made just for you to see were these baby carrots, same brine mixture. And then for the seasoning, again, I used the lemon thyme from my garden, and then I added some lemon zest, and just that's a really fun ingredient to add too if you're looking for seasoning, either lemon, lime, grapefruit, just a little of the zest, not the white pith that's underneath because that's bitter, and that'll give it a nice lemony thyme flavor. So sky's the limit on those things. Those are the recipes that I have here. If you know you want to try this, did you share those links in the chat, or we'll share? So I'm going to email out the links, but if you want to click on them in the chat, you can. The one is the quick refrigerator pickles guidelines and has the recipe for the onions in the North Carolina State Extension publication. The green beans recipe came from the University of Georgia's website. And then I also gave you a link to a recent article from Cooking Light on how to make homemade pickles. Little different brine variation, but again, you can play with this however you want.